All right, welcome to the Heritage Wealth Planning YouTube channel, my friends. Today, I'm going to talk about Revocable Living Trust, or Living Trust, RLTs, Inter Vivos Trust. They're all synonymous. It's all the same thing. A living trust. This will be part 2 of the Estate Planning 101. I think we did it yesterday where we talked about durable powers of attorney and wills and whatnot. So remember, a will, a durable power of attorney, a Medicare direct or a medical directive, advanced medical directive, a living will, a letter of instruction. All those things are over here as what you need as your fundamental estate planning documents for sure. But then people have living trusts. And this, I think there's a lot of confusion on living trusts. I'm going to share with you what you need to know about them right now, why they could be good, why it might not be worth it, and the huge mistakes people make. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm not an attorney. So any attorneys out there who say I'm practicing law, I'm not. I always recommend, in all my books I do, that people go talk to a real live breathing attorney. Allison Bird here in Georgia did my stuff up. She's wonderful. I forgot the name of her firm. But anyway, she's here in Fulton County. Amy Refica is local here to Georgia. Layla Shaver. She's in Carrollton, Georgia. So I know Georgia attorneys like crazy. And they're wonderful. And they're worth your money to spend without question. Who you have up in your neck of the woods, I don't know. But you got to pay somebody, because going on to LegalZoom.com, we're talking about the assets that are going to transfer at your death or incapacity for the rest of your life. All right. So I just, for the love of me, I don't understand people saying I'm going to do it myself without the understanding of what a living trust is. So let me give you an example. I'm going to back up to I was in 2007. I already had a certified financial planner. I'd been in the business for going on 10 years. And I did not know the difference between a trustee or an executor at that point. And I was a CFP with 10 years experience, and I did not know. So why would, I hate to say it, but I'm not stupid. You're not stupid either, but why would you know necessarily what that stuff is if you're not in the business on a regular basis? So if you don't know, it's okay. It just, you need help by someone who does know the stuff. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people look to the computer to give them that help. Sorry, I'm sweating. Just I got back from a run and I took a shower and I'm still sweating a little bit. Anyway, so all right. So here's what you need to know about a living trust. Now, a living trust is simply a piece of paper. A piece of paper. That's it. It says Josh Scanlon, living trust. Josh Scanlon, trustee. The living trust, the most important person is the trustee. That is the person you are assigning, not the ownership of it so much, but the ability to act on your behalf. The trustee is the most important person in a living trust. Now, Josh Scanlon, living trust, with Josh Scanlon, trustee, I serve 2 purposes. I am the grantor, which means I give an asset to the trust. I grant this book into the trust, all right? Now, my trust owns the book. My trust owns this book. Now, because I'm a living trust and I'm still alive, I am the trustee. That's how it works. So I own my trust owns the book, the property that I put in the trust. I still manage it. It still flows under my Social Security number. If there's any income from this, it flows back to my 1040. Nothing changes. There's no way I'm avoiding estate tax. There's no way there's no gift tax, nothing. I literally still control it because this piece of paper is my living trust. I designed this piece of paper. I wrote it up. I am the trustee and I'm the grantor. So I'm granting this book into this trust. Now, what happens all the time, big mistake number 1, is people write up this trust. They'll have this document called Josh Scanlon Living Trust. And the first thing I say is, what is in the trust? What does a trust actually own? Now, what happens is this book has never been titled in the trust. So this trust is sitting here with nothing underneath it. There's nothing there. This book is still out here. And Josh Scanlon, joint tenants of rights to survivorship of my wife, or Josh Scanlon individual account. So you got this book just floating out there, but you got this trust that's right here, and they're not connected. So this trust is completely meaningless. The trust is not even worth the paper it's written on because it doesn't own anything. The trust has to own something for what I want my trust to do to be able to determine what happens to this book. And so as long as I have these 2 separate issues like this, got the book and got the trust. And until I move the book into the trust, and that's called funding your trust. Until you do that, this trust doesn't mean, it literally means nothing. I can't tell you how many people I said, okay, You got this elaborate trust drawn up. The first thing I say is who's a trustee. It's usually the guy or the lady who wrote it, or it'd be a joint trust nowadays. It'd be Josh and Charlotte would be the co-trustees. That's fine. What's in the trust? Okay, that's a problem. If the trust doesn't own anything, it's not worth anything. It's just all there is to it. There's nothing there for the trust to dictate what's called the disposition of your assets. Where do you want your assets to go? So that is the rule number one. If you're going to get a trust, you got to actually fund it. Now, some people say, well, I'm going to fund it with my IRA. Well, you can't do that while you're alive. I mean, you could actually take a distribution of your IRA, pay taxes, all that, and then move that asset into the trust. So that's dumb. Don't do that. So what will happen a lot of times is people name their living trust as the beneficiary of the IRA. Sounds great in theory. But then the question is, don't forget, for that beneficiary to get the money, you have to die. So now you're dead. You've named your trust the beneficiary of the IRA. All right. So let's say you have $500,000 in IRA, a 401k, a 403b. You get hit by that bus. The money then, the IRA, because it's in an individual account, it has to be separate. An IRA cannot be in a living trust. They just can't. It can't. By law, that cannot happen. So now your death, the IRA gets distributed to the trust because the trust is now a beneficiary. There are some mechanisms more to this, and I'm not going to talk about here, but basically what you want to make sure is you want to make sure a human being is the beneficiary of your trust. So let's just put it that way. You do not want a charity. You do not want your estate. You want to make sure a breathing human being is the beneficiary of your trust if you're going to leave your IRA to it. Not going to get to that too much right here. In fact, that's probably it. But anyway, so now your IRA, you die. Goes to your trust. Now your trust owns the IRA, and it has to follow through the procedures of a regular IRA. It has to have required minimum distributions. But what happens is, who is the person that controls the trust? Who is the trustee now? You're dead. So you were the initial trustee. Now you're dead. You have something called a successor trustee. Who is that person? If you wrote your trust up in 1982 and Uncle Bob is your successor trustee and Uncle Bob's got Alzheimer's and doesn't know who you are, that's a big problem. Can't have that. So that's where the trust can be big time problematic, because all the energy you're putting into your trust document to make sure that your assets get transferred according to what your wishes are, well, it all depends on who that trustee is. So initially in a living trust is you. Then you die, it goes to Uncle Bob. But Uncle Bob's nowhere to be found. Uncle Bob's dead. Uncle Bob is, like I said, Alzheimer's. Then your trust isn't worth anything either, because there's no one to serve the role as trustee. And that's where the legal court's got to get in. But now it's even worse, because a trust bypasses probate. A trust that with assets in the trust, again, we got the trust, we put our assets in there, you die. This does not go to probate. This avoids probate, all right, because you have it set up in this trust. The trust owns it. Just like an IRA, just like a life insurance contract, the beneficiary now is established that's outside of probate. It's a probate avoidance tool. So the question is, okay, that's great. We avoided probate, but there's no successor trustee. There's no one there to take disposition of the assets and transfer it like you want. So now what happens? Well, that's a big nightmare that you got to figure out with the legal system, whatnot, getting lawyers and all that, when you could have just simply said at the end of the day, my trust, I name Uncle Bob co-trust or successor trustee, but Uncle Bob's now knee deep in Alzheimer's. So I need to revisit my trust with what's called an amendment. I got to get an amendment to name a different successor trustee. Maybe I'll name Aunt Joan or something like that. And Aunt Joan, she lives in California, you live in Georgia. Do you really want her being the successor trustee? Probably not. I'm not a hugest fan of the trust, frankly, in that regard, because I find that the trustee is a successor trustee gets overlooked a lot. And I always say, okay, you got this trust, you drew it up. That's fantastic. I'm very glad to hear that. What's in there? Okay. So the trust is unfunded, and that's the wrong answer, unless there's some reason for that to happen, i.e. all your assets are held in IRAs, life insurance. I hate to even say real estate property, because real estate property is the one time you probably want to use a trust. I'll talk about that here in just a second. That's the first question I asked. All right, you have this living trust drawn up, but there's nothing in there. Why? Okay. Now, if everything is in individually, like IRA accounts, 403bs, 401ks, you can't fund your trust with that account. Now, again, you can name your beneficiary designation on those accounts to your trust. I'd challenge that to some degree. I'd wonder, what are we trying to serve? What purpose are we trying to serve? If the answer is, well, your son is got a smack habit and we don't want him taking that and shooting up his nose or his veins there, okay, that's good. That's a reason why we want to set up a trust to manage the distribution of your assets so he doesn't just blow it on crack. Successfully connected. Okay, well, that's weird. All right, so again, if your son has a problem with cocaine or something like that, we don't want him having access to it, but we don't want to just disinherit him outright. We're going to get our trustee to make sure that your son gets the money, but gets it over time. And $10,000 a year, 5,000, whatever it is you choose. That's one. Generally speaking, if your son or your daughter or your grandkids are fine, you don't need to do all that stuff. You just make them get the money outright. Again, I'm sorry I'm sweating, guys. I just got back from a run, took a shower, and I love my hot shower. So you know what happens when you get hot showers? You get a little bit sweaty. So that's what a living trust can do. It can say, at the end of the day, I don't want little Joey to get this money and just sniff it up his nose. I want to make sure that I have somebody there to protect him from himself. That's a big deal. If you're not that concerned with your son or your daughter, or your grandkids, then who just give the money outright? Who cares? Hopefully they don't screw it up. But at the end of the day, why would you want to put handcuffs on their ability to get the money if you don't think they're going to ruin it? Now, what happens part two on a living trust? If you have real estate in multiple jurisdictions, all right, so I live in Georgia. I'm from Maine. My daughter was born in Phoenix. So let's just say we have a vacation home up in Sebago Lake, Maine. I got my primary residence here, and we have a condo in Mesa, Arizona. All right, so that's 3 different probates. All right, so someone's got to probate my asset at my death here in Georgia. Someone's got to go up to Maine, probate my assets there in Cumberland County, Maine. I guess Sebago Lake. I don't know what county that is, but in Maine. And then someone's got to go to Maricopa County, Phoenix, or Arizona to probate that. Yeah, that's a pain in the butt. No other way around that. Who is going to do that? Well, it's your executor or executrix, is like we talked about yesterday, if everything is going to transfer via will. If it transfers via trust and you put your real estate in these trusts before you die, then it's just your trustee. And basically all they have done is they're saying, going down to probate county probate court, they're saying, I got this house. I want to rename it from Josh and Charlotte Joint Tenants with Rights to Survivorship. I want to name it into our trust with Josh and Charlotte co-trustee. And my brother Ben as a successor trustee. And that's pretty good, because that way Ben, when we die, he doesn't have to go to all these various places in front of these probate courts and probate each asset in different counties. So when you have multiple real estates in multiple locations, putting real estate assets into a trust actually makes a lot of sense. I'll leave that up to you and your attorney to do that. Because remember, each attorney typically is registered in 1 state or 2 states, but generally you probably need a different one in Arizona, different one in Maine, and different one in Georgia. But I'll leave that up to you to determine that. But that actually makes sense. Now, you still got to go to probate, because you still got to rechange the title of the account, the deed. Right now, the deed is in Josh and Charlotte's name, joint tenants with rights to survivorship. And that simply means when I die, the property goes 100% to my survivor, which is Charlotte. When she dies, the property goes 100% to me. Joint tenants with rights to survivorship. Once one person dies, the remaining survivor gets the entirety of the property. Now, so it's still got to go to the county probate court and say, all right, I am Josh. This is Charlotte. We would like to move this real estate asset that we have in Sebago Lake into our living trust. And whatever mechanism that is, it's a pain. No getting around that. And there might be some issues when it comes to homeowners insurance. You'd need to find legal resources to do that. But that makes sense. From a trustee's perspective, Charlotte and I are both dead. And my brother steps up and says, man, I got my own family to take care of. I was getting ready to go on African safari. Now I got to go to Phoenix. I got to go to Sebago Lake, Maine. I got to come to Georgia. And by the way, I live in Richmond. That's not very fun. Conversely, if you had everything in the trust, it's already done. I mean, the title has already been, the deed has already been changed, and the trust owns the money, and my brother is the trustee by letter of the trust document. All right, so the living trust, a couple things. It becomes irrevocable at death. I stress this so much. I say, you realize you have a living trust, has no assets in it. Number one mistake, yes. You realize you have a living trust and Uncle Joey was or Uncle Bob or whatever was your successor trustee, and he has Alzheimer's, doesn't recognize who you are. Yes. You realize this living trust becomes irrevocable at death. It cannot be changed. Oh, so you wrote this up when President Reagan was in office. All right, do you think there might be some issues that we might need to redo this? Folks, I've had men in particular, they're so worried about the estate being taxed that they set up these elaborate trusts back in 2000 under Clinton. And what they've done is essentially they've disinherited their spouses because they did move their assets into the trust. But back then, it was like a $675,000 estate exemption. So what they're doing is they're saying our trust is going to set up to maximize the estate exemption so it doesn't go into my wife's hands. And now the estate exemption is what, $11 million? I'm sitting there thinking you can't do, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but it's like, wait a second. If you haven't done your trust since George W. Bush signed I think it was the Pension Protection Act of 2003 or 6. I can't remember. But when Bush signed some tax law in 2003 or 6 that started to make the estate tax exemption much higher, if you haven't updated your trust and your trust owns property and the trust document says explicitly, we will transfer this asset to a second trust to bypass my wife receiving the assets in her name, you've disinherited her. You can't do that. I mean, you can. But it's crazy talk. I've had a case. Oh, it bothers me to know, and I'm sorry I'm getting emotional about this, but I've never get this woman up in Long Island. I had her as a client. Husband died. Husband thought it was the nicest guy in the world. I knew him. And when he died, he had all these elaborate trusts because I didn't really have a chance to talk to him before I took on his wife as a client, but I talked to him briefly. He was trying to protect her from New York State estate tax and from the feds, because back then when he did his stuff, the Fed was only 675 and the state of New York is 1 million now. They might have changed it, but since that was in 2010. But back then it was 675. So anything that went to his wife, now she only has a $675,000 exemption, which will be subject to estate tax at her death. And so we set up these things called bypass trusts. I don't do that again. I'm just telling you how this works. So he's trying to bypass her getting the actual ownership of the money. And it absolutely makes sense. It's a wonderful mechanism to do. But now with the law as it is, where the estate exemption is $11 million, if you have a $2 million estate, none of it's subject to estate tax. Now, there might be some issue with the state of New York. I get that, but that's minimal compared to the feds. So now what's going on is she has no access to his money. And she needs it because she lives in Long Island, which ain't cheap if you're from up that way. And they were sitting there thinking, there's nothing we can do. You've got to get the legal documents. You got to get the courts to look at you, to take care of you, because there's literally nothing that can be done. You don't own this property. The trust does. And I can't remember who the trustee was, but it wasn't her. It wouldn't have made any sense to make her the trustee. So don't do that. And that's the whole point about a trust. It sounds good in theory. And I'm a fan of it. If you have multiple properties in real estate and multiple jurisdictions in real estate, I'm a fan of it. If you got a kid that's going to sniff stuff up their nose, absolutely. I'm a fan of if you got a kid who engages in risky scientific work and doctors and stuff like that, and you don't want him to take ownership of the money. Absolutely. You want to put that in a separate trust when he gets sued, they can't go after those assets. 100%. But those are exceptions. The rules are the vast majority of people do not need a set of bypass trusts to avoid estate tax. You can easily avoid probate, my friends, with just simple TOD arrangements, transfer on death, on brokerage accounts, on anything that's non-IRA, a TOD, a transfer on death. A bank account is a POD, a payable on death. So all you're doing is you're setting up a beneficiary designation on a non-IRA account. That's what you're doing. You're going down the bank and say, hey, I want to name my brother Ben as my POD. So that way when I die, it doesn't go through probate. All he has to do is validate that he's he and I'm dead, and he'll get the money just like that, just like a beneficiary designation. You can set up probate avoidance techniques. Just make sure you're using your beneficiary designations as well. So remember, you have an IRA, you die. What happens? Your beneficiary says, hey, USAA, or hey, Vanguard, my dad just died. I'm Maddie. Okay, Maddie, we got to verify you are you. Yep, here's my driver's license, blah, blah, blah. And we got to verify your dad's dead. Yep, here's my death certificate, my dad's death certificate. Okay, money goes, transfers, lickety split. No probate, no fuss, no muss. You can do that with everything. Now, real estate is the one issue. That's not a huge concern, frankly. I mean, it could be, I guess, but real estate could be the one issue on how you need to avoid probate. But I just don't think probate is that big of a deal. Now, I'll leave that up to your state. Don't know, don't care. That's up to you, your attorneys in your state, wherever you're from. A lot of people here in Georgia, they don't think probate is a big deal. Tennessee is not a big deal. I do have a guy on Facebook with who's an attorney in California. I think he's in California, but he says California is a nightmare. So I don't know anything about that. But anyway, at the end of the day, probate avoidance is simple. Just TOD designations. You just call your mutual fund company, said, I want to transfer on death, and they'll get you set up. The easiest pie. POD at the bank does that all the time. In fact, don't tell anybody, but if you add POD, you're actually increasing your FDIC coverage. Shh, it's true. You had POD, payable on death accounts. You are increasing your FDIC insurance amount on your bank accounts. Yeah, right. In fact, you can go down to a bank and say, hey, I got $750,000 in a savings account with you all. I want to make sure this thing is fully maxed for FDIC coverage. What do I need to do? And those bankers will know. They'll say, okay, well, we got to make a joint account. And I think it's $250 now. I forgot. But anyway, then we got to add a POD. So if you have $750,000 in a savings account at the bank, you go down there and say, I want to name my daughter as POD. My wife and I own this. So that's $500,000 of FDIC coverage. POD, my daughter, Maddie. So now we have $750,000 of FDIC coverage just by naming a POD. Pretty good, huh? That's why you pay the big bucks to be on the Heritage Wealth Planning YouTube channel. All right. So living trust. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not an attorney. Do not want to be an attorney. And a long, long time ago, I thought about it, but my father is my mom's second husband. Is that a father-in-law or is that stepdad? I can't remember. He advised me against it, and I had a bunch of friends that became attorneys and are just miserable. And it's sad, man. Now, there's some attorneys doing pretty good work, but some of these guys are just, not happy. So I never want to be an attorney. I'm not an attorney. Don't come to me for legal advice, please, but go seek a real live attorney. In my book, as I talked about yesterday, I talk about, right here, chapter 7, where we talk about the various things on estate planning documents. This book, actually, you can get this for free. I just made this free on Amazon now. So if you go to Amazon.com under my name, Scanlon there, you can get this free too under Kindle. It's for the next 5 days. So you might want to do that. This is my first book, Strategic Money Planning, 8 Easy Ways to Get Your Financial House in Order. That's free of charge right now for the next 5 days on Amazon, free of Kindle. But anyway, all right, so I'm not an attorney. Don't want to be an attorney. But I talk to attorneys all the time, and I know what you need to do in terms of talking to your attorney. And if a good attorney who does real estate planning will know, trustee, funding the trust, remember the trust is irrevocable at your death. You do not want to disinherit your spouse by accident. And I'm sure there are some women who've done that with men. Everyone I've seen has been men every single time, because they're trying to protect their spouse, their wives, from the estate tax of Governor Cuomo up there in New York, and whoever the Baker, I guess, in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is a nightmare. $1 million state exemption for the love of Mary. New Jersey was $675. Then Christie and the legislature there raised that, I think, to $2 million, which is pretty good, but they also raised the gas tax. But anyway, in New Jersey, it's horrific. But anyway, all right, so that's it on the living trust. So remember, living trust, I like it. Make sure it's funded. Make sure you identify the successor trustee. It doesn't avoid... You're not avoiding estate tax. It flows back to you as a living trust under your social. Any income that's derived from your living trust flows back to you. You're not avoiding estate tax. You are avoiding probate as long as there's something funded in the trust. And a living trust is a revocable trust. It will be irrevocable at your death. Lastly, let me share another story with you real quick while I'm thinking about this. I had a case with a guy someplace, I won't name it, but let's just put it this way. They had a pretty sizable estate in New Jersey. Remember I said New Jersey had a $675,000 estate exemption. And that simply means that anything above $675,000 was subject to the New Jersey estate tax, which is not small. Long story short, so they thought they had set up a irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is literally you are giving a gift of something, some kind of asset. I have my irrevocable trust. Josh is giving this asset, this book, into the trust. I no longer have control of this. The trust has its own tax ID. The trust has its own 1040. It's actually 1041 it's got to fill out. I no longer have control of it. It is literally a gift. I cannot control this. Somebody else is a trustee. Most likely should not be your spouse, but be it as it is, somebody else is the trustee. I have no stake in this whatsoever, this property. That's what an irrevocable trust is. I'm giving a gift, which means it's inherently out of my estate. Now, what happened was, because it's irrevocable and it's a certain amount of time goes by, usually 3 years, but your state is specific, at your death is not considered as part of your estate. At your death is not subject to your state's estate tax. And again, New Jersey was quite low back then. So I said, I'd like to see that trust doc. And so we look at the trust doc on the very first page. It says the grantor is Joe Schmo, and this trust can be revoked at any point by the grantor. And Joe Schmo is a guy who thought he funded an irrevocable trust. I'm sitting there thinking, this is revocable. This is a living trust. You're Joe Schmo, are you not? Yes. Well, read that to me. What does it say? It says Joe Schmo is a grantor, Joe Schmo is a trustee, and Joe Schmo can revoke this at any time because Joe Schmo is a grantor. Bah! So long story short, we had to call the attorney. The attorney said, oh, yeah, no, it's a living trust. I said, man, he thought it was an irrevocable trust. He goes, oh, no, we got to change it over to an irrevocable trust. Well, and I was like, well, when are you going to do that? Because he's worried that it's going to be part of his estate. He goes, oh, yeah, I know, we got to get done. Anyway, that was not good. That was bad. So that could have been a big, big problem right there. So anyway, when you have trust documents, just look them up, look them over, see what you got. It's important to have that. All right, that's all I want to say. I'm yapping here, I'm rambling. So if you like what you see here, subscribe. Look at that. That's my mind control. Subscribe, and then don't forget to hit the bell to be notified. I see you got a guy or a lady give me a thumbs up. Thumbs up, man, please. They help me a lot to get YouTube to send this content to other folks. So please give me a thumbs up if you would. Comments are always appreciated. I love comments. That's fun, actually. So don't forget to comment below. And hopefully I can get next time I do a video, it won't be all sweaty and whatnot. Ooh, sprints. That's a good exercise, my friends. Just do some sprints. I'm telling you. Oh, man. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.